So I'm going to say something to the people who aren't here. I know you're not here, and it affects your grade. I'm not happy. Hi to those who are, the three of you who are here. Thanks for coming. It means a lot to me. Today we're talking about Veronese, our last artist, and we started to look at his works down at the National Gallery, and some of them weren't out. So I wanted to look at those and spend more time sort of talking about the background for Veronese, right, how we understand his works, and also, some of the background details. I told you I'd be looking into some things after that trip, and so I have. So here we see our first of our pictures by Veronese. He is, as his name suggests, he's from the city of Verona, right? Veronese means from Verona. And that's part of the Venetian mainland, the terra firma. And so we've seen a lot of artists this half of the semester that have worked on the terra firma, right? We looked at Moroni, we looked at Bassano, we looked at Moretto, right? And many of them spent some time in Venice, and Veronese is one who makes his entire career in Venice. He moves to Venice in the early 1550s, around 1551, 1552 is when he gets to Venice, and stays there for the rest of his career. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but first let's talk about this picture. This is Moses, the story of Moses. He was born in Egypt during the captivity of the Israelites under Pharaoh. And at this particular point, there had been enough male offspring among the Israelites where Pharaoh had become concerned that there were too many Israelites, and they were, the population was growing, and so he issued a decree that said that any newborn Hebrew boys would be killed. That would keep the population down, right? So Moses was born during that time, and his mother hides him, right, so that he won't be killed by Pharaoh's evil henchmen. And so she keeps his secret for a while, and that's becoming difficult, so she puts him in this basket that she lines with tar and floats it in the banks of the Nile, right, in the bushes along the banks of the Nile, right? And there he's discovered by none other than the Pharaoh's daughter, right? This is the one who discovers him, and she doesn't know where he came from. She doesn't know he's a Hebrew boy. So she takes him in, she adopts him, and raises him as part of the royal household. So Moses becomes part of Pharaoh's household, despite Pharaoh's best efforts, right, to get rid of all of the Hebrew kids. Ha ha, God said, right? Now, that's what we see, right? There's little baby Moses being taken, the servant in the lower left corner with the basket, right, the wicker basket. Other figures who have gone down to the Nile get wet, right? And the baby now about to be handed up to Pharaoh's daughter, who's dressed very, very elegantly, right? And you can see she's got her court, and the court is sort of modeled on Renaissance courts, not only in the mode of dress, certainly not Egyptian dress, right? But over and above that, the idea of having a little dwarf as a court entertainer, right? There he is in the lower right corner. Veronese likes these dwarfs, and we'll see it actually gets him in trouble. We'll get around to talking about that, but they're pointing out, look at what we found, right? This begins to point to some of the things that are typical for Veronese's work, and we'll see that this is kind of important about his arrival in Venice and what he ends up doing as he establishes his career in Venice. Stylistically speaking, the figures are more sedate than Tintoretto's. They have more of a noble bearing. They're very handsome. I'll give you a second, Amanda. He uses these figures to, even more than Tintoretto does, to show off rather exquisite fabrics and colors. Right? And he loves sort of narrative details, little side things that are interesting. In this case, I think it's the court dwarf in the right corner, right? But sometimes it's animals, sometimes it's other details, the basket. And he loves focusing on these things and bringing them into the narrative. And so if you think back to the trip to the NGA on Friday, when we were talking about, for example, those copper pots that the camels are drinking out of, right, in Rebecca at the well, or the fabrics that we saw there, that was part of what we see with his work, right? And so this is really a hallmark of Veronese's work throughout his entire career. And it helps to separate it from Tintoretto, who's much more chaotic, right? In almost all of his works, much more chaotic, much more mannerist. And there's something, what some scholars have called anti-mannerist about Veronese, as if he's pulling back from that artificiality of mannerist art, especially the chaos of Tintoretto, and trying to have a sort of more timeless and classical kind of art. Amanda? It totally looks like Baroque art. And I think it's because Baroque art, especially in Italy, is responding to the Counter-Reformation, and this is as well, very much responding to the Counter-Reformation. The Council of Trent, which was the church's official response to Protestant Reformation, issued its decrees in 1464. And at the last of the three councils, these met over the course of 20 years, from 1543 to 1563, at the last of the three councils, in 1563, they started talking about art. And the reason that they were so concerned is that the Protestants up north, as part of the Reformation, had actually launched into a series of iconoclastic riots where artworks had been destroyed. And there were numbers of these through the Germanic countries in the 16th century. First in Germany in the 1520s, but then in France in the 1550s, and again in Belgium or the Low Countries in the 1560s. So this was a big reaction to that, right? Their idea that, hey, well, do we think that art is good or bad? What's the role of art? And they said that, yes, art is good because not everybody can read, right? And so there's the decree that says art is central to Catholic teaching. And this is meant to apply only to religious pictures, right? This doesn't apply to non-religious pictures, although the style that comes out of this does, right? And they basically say that since religious art is important as an instructive tool, it needs to be clear, right? Easily legible. It needs to be accurate. And that was a pretty wide net. Like, they wouldn't have gone in Veronese's case for the way that Pharaoh's daughter is dressed, even though it's inaccurate. Right? But you don't want things that just don't belong. And it needs to inspire a sentiment of piety in the part of the viewer. Those are the three basic tenets of art, right? And so this leads very much to, Amanda was asking about Baroque art. This leads very much to these sort of eloquent gestures, simplicity, melding of the different forms working together, a grandeur, right? That really mannerism doesn't have. Right? So it's a very good observation that is definitely part of this. Yeah, Jay.
So are we moving away from mannerism?
Yes. In fact, there's a good book. It's short if you wanted to look into it. There's a book by Walter Friedlander called Mannerism and Anti-Mannerism in Italian Painting. And he's the one that coined that term of anti-mannerism. It's sort of like anti-matter, doesn't it? Anti-mannerism. with the idea that, with Veronese, we begin to sort of shift away from this. Now, keep in mind that while mannerism became all the rage in the 1540s and 1550s in Venice, it was not the only option out there, right? Especially for artists who just landed in Venice, mannerism was one possible path to take. And that Tintoretto did run into some issues because of his mannerist tendencies. Some of his patrons didn't care for it as much as others did. We can look back on it rather well now. And he was able to foment or forge a very, very good career. What with the San Rocco pictures, with the School of San Rocco, decorations in the Doge's palace, right? These big to-dos. So he certainly did well for himself. So let's look at this, and then we'll talk about this mannerism, annual mannerism thing a bit more. So there's a nice detail of Pharaoh's daughter, much crisper than my overall picture of his love of textures and colors throughout. And that should come as no surprise as a Venetian painter that he would love color, but certainly texture becomes part of it, pattern, and again these narrative details that he slips in everywhere we look. And so I was ahead of myself in my notes. Council Trip, right, was part of it. That's what's moving us toward, as Amanda rightly described, the kind of art that we would see throughout the 17th century. Veronese is really very much the beginning of that, the advent of that. He's not the only one, but the only one for our merits that's important that way. So when he arrives, right, in Venice in 1551, like I said, there are two divergent trends, and one of them is Tintoretto. So we have to think about this idea of Veronese landing in Venice and his relationship to the Venetian artists who were there. And so when Veronese gets there from Verona, when he gets to Venice, he sort of two different. Who is it? Two paths stood before me walk in the woods.
Oh, yeah.
Is it Burns? No, it's
Robert Frost.
Frost. Right? And he takes in fact I don't know which of the roads is less traveled, but nonetheless two paths stood before him. And one would be the sort of busy mannerism of Tintoretto. A nice comparison, these two, since they're both scenes from the life of Moses, right? The other path, of course, is the sort of the grandeur of Titian. In the 1550s, right, Titian had gone back to sort of very strongly in the 1540s and 1550s. Titian had gone back to mythologies. Remember, he was doing this series of paintings for the King of Spain, King Philip II of Spain, and copies of them for others. And he was doing these in the 1550s, right? But even prior to that, in the 1540s, remember the rape of Benaiah with the gold coins, or the Venus of Urbino. He's really kind of refound classicism in a grand manner in the 1550s. And this seems to be where Veronese goes, right, is toward Titian's grand manner. And to what proof of this? Here's one of later Titian, or later Veronese, but you can see very much sort of his idea of Titian's composition. Right? He's just taken all the forms and reformatted it, and you might even plays down some of Titian's high drama a bit. So instead of showing the moment when Adonis is taken off from Venus, he's going to go get, killed, right? This is the moment of seduction instead, right? So here he's fast asleep. I love how Cupid's playing with the dog, right? But it's sort of the same hounds that Titian had painted are now sort of brought in. And again, the bench, right? And Venus sort of seen in a similar pose, but from the opposite side, right? That's something he does two or three different times. Veronese does. So when he arrives in Venice, he sort of turns his back on Tintoretto and turns toward Titian, right? And he becomes sort of the youthful proponent. And I should mention, he's not that young. He's in his late 40s. Maybe 50s by this point. He was born in 1528. Do the math, right? He's around 50 by 80. But when he gets there, he's 30, right? And he becomes the more youthful proponent of Titian's style. Now, Titian's still got 20 years left on the clock. He doesn't die until 1576. So we're in a very, very long time, right? So he moves this direction. I was just reading this morning that Titian may have had a very active role in this. It's not just Veronese going, what do I want to do? But Titian, it seems, enlisted Veronese. Because as it turns out, Titian hated Tintoretto, and vice versa. They did not get along. And we don't know exactly why, but we do know that they were kind of, they were at odds. And even though Tintoretto seems to have studied under Titian for a brief period early on, by the 1550s and 1560s, I think Titian does not like what Tintoretto is doing. And they become sort of active rivals against each other. And so Veronese comes to town young, and Titian seems to have enlisted him kind of as his younger protege, his younger self, to sort of take up Titian's cause in the rivalry. The degree to which Veronese felt any animosity towards Tintoretto, I have no idea, right? If he's just sort of entering into this rivalry that can be very good for a career to have a rival. You know? If you got somebody pushing you, you'll do better work. If there's nobody out there that's making any challenges, then you just languish and you have to bring your A game, you know? Here's a nice analogy. I was a Portland Trailblazers sports fan in the 90s, and we had Clyde Drexler, who was like the greatest player in the world, at the same time as Michael Jordan. You know? And we couldn't win a championship to save our lives, and Clyde just had the moves, and he was beautiful to watch, but he wasn't Michael Jordan, you know? And they went to the finals 2 or 3 times in the early 90s together, right? And they just couldn't break through because there was a rival out there. They got on great, you know? They were gentlemen about it. But anyway, that's my analogy off the top of my head. Right? You need somebody out there to challenge you. And so I don't think Veronese hated Tintoretto in any way. Not in the way that Titian apparently did. But Titian's a cranky old guy by this point, you know? Titian's in his 70s, right, during the time of this. And Veronese is much younger. Okay, well, long and the short of it is, this is why he picked up this sort of anti-mannerist trend that, as Amanda mentioned, is very prophetic of what will become Baroque art. Well, that's for another class. I don't want to I want to get through Veronese. Suffice to say, Baroque is a term we use for 17th century art, and it has to do with everything we're talking about here is the seeds of it. The Counter-Reformation inspiring this, it becomes dramatic, it becomes appealing to your senses. Venetian 16th century art is a key component to that, especially Titian on the one hand, and then I think late 16th century art like this. And it is a reaction. It begins more or less late 16th century in Italy as a reaction to the Council of Trent and its rules on art. But it is a move away from mannerism, a move back toward what we see with high Renaissance art, but with an added sense of that appeal to piety, right? Renaissance art had, and this is different. This is not really, I think it's a question, like I said, it's not really a question for this class. But Venetian art is different from most Renaissance art in that most Renaissance art is very much appeals to your mind. Most Renaissance art is about ratios and harmony, balance, and proportion. And it's a very mental art. Venetian is different than that. It has all that stuff, but there's the poetry, there's the landscape, there's the color versus drawing, which sets Venetian art apart. That said, right, what Venetian art does bring, the sensuality, is something that becomes one of the seed components of Baroque art, as it turns back to the grandeur, the nobility of the Renaissance, but adds in these appeals to your piety. How do you appeal to someone's piety? And there's many answers to this question, but the answers that they came up with in the Baroque period are drama, sensuality. Very, very appealing. And Veronese's got that in spades, you know. Look at that wonderful, look at the robe that Adonis is wearing. Look at that great striped sort of lemon robe underneath, right? Or, yeah, it looks like, I think it's described and it's got the ripples of the, or Venus's own robe. And again, perfectly, right, very proprietous with the way her arm comes across, covering up most of her nudity that way, right? And again, these other wonderful details, like she's fanning in, it's hot out, right? And these are the things that Veronese loves, right? These things, right? So let's continue to work our way through Veronese's career. Shortly after arriving in the mid-1550s, Veronese got his biggest commission, a major decorative commission, actually a pair of them. He gets to work on the Doge's palace. The Doges are getting everybody to help, right? Titian works there, Tintoretto works there, Veronese does as well. And then his real masterpiece of decorative work is the Church of San Sebastiano in Venice. This is for him what San Rocco, the Scuola of San Rocco was for Tintoretto. They sort of pull on all the stops and get to decorate everything. And the ceiling here, the insets of the ceiling are all these massive Veronese canvases, still installed in situ here, right? This is this big break, right? This opportunity. And this is in your textbook, right? So I thought I'd bring it in as well. So now we're looking straight up at that oculus in the middle. But each of the ones around it contain paintings as well that are part of the suite of decorations, right? As is the other oculus on the far end, right? They're both this way. And so as you look up through the ceiling, and again, looks very, very Baroque. It looks, right? It extends our space as we look up. So we look up through the oculus in the ceiling area. I've got a slide of this coming up, but I'm wanting to see in situ. We see the sky above us, and as if the building extends above our heads, and the cities are now looking down at us, coming over the lip of that earth, right? And almost as if they're, it's like a Saturday morning cartoon where, you know, Wile E. Coyote is chasing the Roadrunner, and he gets to the edge of the cliff, and he goes, whoa! Wait, you know, and they're kind of scrambling. So they're right there, and they're about ready to jump into our space from up above. And that's a slightly better picture. I've not seen this in person, so I can't tell you exactly how it looks. But how typical Veronese, because in addition to the things we talked about, like colors, fabric, textures, details, narrative details that liven up the picture. Another thing he loves is arranging, and we talked about this downtown, is arranging things in a frieze, right? You know what I mean by the word frieze, F-R-I-E-Z-E, right? Parallel to the picture plane, parallel to the frame, right? So there's not a lot of figures that, where the line of figures would move back into space, right? And you can imagine something like Tintoretto, who's talking to right? If you look at the picture plane in Tintoretto, you'll get a range of figures that will be like this, moving back into space, or over here, establishing perspective that shoots you back into the distance. Remember, our Christ was over here, and the tiny little boat was here with the figures on it, right? And there was that idea that as you looked at this, that you got that moving back into space. But with Veronese, everything is visible across the front, right, like a fence. And even the bricks down below that they're standing on. And yes, they do lean back a bit, but the overwhelming effect is that frieze-like effect. And that's true in a lot of his work. And that's really one of the major compositional choices that he makes that gives it that solidity, right? That anti-mannerist tendency. That's as much as anything. what solidifies it. Now, again, for a ceiling decoration, looking back at Titian, we didn't look at this one when we went over Titian, but this is the ceiling of the Scuola Grande of, this is the Church of Santa Maria della Salute in Venice, and it's a ceiling decoration, and you can see that Titian, imagine this now up above, right? This is, you look up and see this, it's not on the wall, just as Veronese says, that he's beginning to open it up to the sky above and the area down below. That it's kind of disgusting that there's the Goliath's head as if it's about to drop from the ceiling, because it's already been severed from his neck. So thinking back to these relatively recent Titians, we have one like this as well from the Scuola Grande of St. John the Evangelist, showing St. John on Patmos, and where we get the sense of the edge of the ground and we're looking up at him, right? There have been times when the National Gallery has chosen to have this on the ceiling, so you have to look up at it, right? And I've seen it that way just once. But certainly you can see this is exactly sort of where Veronese is picking up things. And as we trace our way through Veronese's career, what we find is numerous times he's looking back at Titian. And sometimes they're fairly overt, right? Sometimes they're subtle. This is a much more subtle one. How do you handle a ceiling picture, right? 10 years later, he continues to work at the Church of San Sebastiano in Venice. In addition to doing the ceiling, he has been later, because of the success of that, is commissioned to do the high altar, where we see the Virgin appearing up above in heaven in glory with various saints, including Saint Sebastian, shot full of arrows, tied to a post down below, but other saints around him. Again, looking at Titian, looking hard at Titian, and channeling it. In particular, the two famous Titian altarpieces in the Frari Chapel, the Franciscan Chapel. Remember the high altar with the Assumption of the Virgin, where heaven opened up above in clouds that completed the circle of the arch. He's done that, hasn't he? I should have brought that in. I brought this one in instead, because this is also like a huge touchstone. This thing is building up on a triangle from one corner upwards, right? Heaven up above, the massive columns that define the space. Right? So, commission after commission, Veronese is looking back towards by Titian. And as I mentioned, Titian may have had an active role in this, and sort of coercing is the wrong word. Coaching him on how to make works that are the antithesis of what Tintoretto might have done in the same situation. He had a fine career from it, right? And again, the idea of rivalry is not necessarily a bad thing, right? You need someone to push you. So our St. Jerome, from the National Gallery that we saw downtown, and we talked about while we were there, just to add a few things to it, is that this was probably also for San Sebastiano. We're almost sure that there's a record of a picture of St. Jerome next to the altar, not the altar itself, but over the doorway that led from the altar to the sacristy, right? Which is where if you don't know your Catholic stuff, this is where the priest keeps the host, right? This is the storage place for the communion stuff, right? So that's where it's all prepared before it's brought out to be given to the congregation, right? So there's a little room off to the side. And so if you go up to the main altar, right, and it's off to the right usually, is the door. And off to the other side would be often the treasury, where the golden things that you use, right? So there's record in the records of San Sebastiano that there was a St. Jerome over the sacristy. And the experts are pretty sure that of the Veronese St. Jerome, this is the most likely candidate for that, right? So that gives it the same context as this major commission that Veronese was working on, beginning in the 1450s, but obviously continuing through on and off again throughout his career, right? It again borrows from Titian. Here's a very late Titian, right? Titian died in 1576, so by this point, 1580, Titian is out of the picture, so to speak, right? But this is one of his latest works. So this is toward the very end of his career. We didn't look at late Titian very much, but he got very, very loose at the end of his career. And really that grandeur that we were seeing in the Poesi picture starts to disappear into old age. It's very easy to see when you compare these two that where Veronese is taking sort of ideas from Titian and simply reworking them. The pose of St. Jerome, for example, the clothing, the facial features, the massive book in front of him. He's taken the cross now, right? And I love how both of them are taking what Bellini did and playing with it, right? Bellini was the artist that made the reading St. Jerome replace the self-lacerating St. Jerome, right? Because there had been these two traditions. We got this from the Belting Reader, right? There had been the tradition of St. Jerome in the wilderness beating his chest and looking across and denying any earthly pleasure in order to focus entirely on the sufferings of Christ. And on the other hand, there had been this tradition of St. Jerome the scholar who translated the Latin version of the Bible, sitting in a studio at work and dressed like a cardinal. Right? And what Bellini had done was to meld the two, right? Make him reading outside and not laughing at himself, not beating himself up. And what both Titian and Veronese are doing is to bring the two back together again, right? So he's got his book, but he stopped reading. And he's gone back to, or has started to, destroy his body, right? And it's wonderful for us to think about the idea of, as St. Jerome is destroying his body, Titian's late paintings also destroy the body in a way. You know, his early paintings have been so much about fleshiness and corporeality and big, hefty figures were really healthy, you know, robust, right? And his late figures just get emaciated. And it's not just St. Jerome, they kind of all do. He begins to focus on these things where the body just becomes dematerialized. You know, it's just, yeah, or your body, your life is passing and your body is. Maybe Michelangelo is the same thing. It'd be a fascinating. People have gotten into sort of artists in old age, what happens to artists when they've lived for a very, very long time and they're still working at the end of their careers. Right? Because Michelangelo doesn't die in time either. And his life works do the same thing. He kind of goes from these images of, think about the David, think about Adam, right? Early Michelangelo is really as healthy and robust as the figures you'll ever find by anybody anywhere. Except maybe Titian. And in his late work, he just starts carving away, keeps carving away until the body just starts to disappear. It's really fascinating. Okay. Another one that could enter in is Picasso. Picasso's late works also. There's similar things, but it's modern and it doesn't really work the same way. Right? So, what Veronese has done from the Titian, right, is he's taken the cross and he's actually put it right in the book. It's really kind of an inventive play on what Titian was doing. Titian's pausing from reading to look. And now he's not going to pause from reading, right? Okay, right here. Right? I need to grab it and make it more active. And then also, he heightens the drama on a certain level, doesn't he? Here, you see the wounds on his chest from having whacked at himself. That's not only is it turning red, but it's bleeding. The skin has broken open, right? And again, this is all to remind himself of death. And so this is why on the table we have the age timer, right, the hourglass, as a reminder of time passing, but also the skull. And I think we were talking about how odd the skull looks. That's because your Zygomatic arch doesn't do that. I was just thinking about that arch as I was looking at this picture, right? So you know you've got a bone here on the side of your eye. You can feel it on your head. You know where you get a headache, right? The place you get a headache is where there's a muscle. That's why you get a headache there. There's a muscle that runs here, and it goes sort of into your cheek, right in there, right in your sinus mechanism. But this muscle, if you run your fingers on the side of your eye, feel that bone. Do this. Feel the bone, and then you get to your cheekbone, right? And then you can run that bone back, right? And then it goes back to your ear. That's called your zygomatic arch, right? And it's a bone that, and if you follow the bottom of your eye, your face, right? You write it down here. You can begin to isolate it. You can feel it over there. There's that bone, your cheekbone, is a piece of bone that separates away from the rest of your skull. You can stick your finger down through it if you've got a skull, right? But it sits like a flying buttress on an old Gothic cathedral, right? It comes from here over to here. And the point of that is to give you the places where the muscles to attach for not only your eyes to work and, your facial features, and that's why you get the headache right there, is from that muscle, but also for the muscles that move the rest of your face, right? Your jaw and whatnot. Those are all attached in there. Now, the problem with this skull is that it doesn't go up like this, right? It doesn't end up somewhere up here. It goes straight back to your ear, right? And that's why that gets so goofy. And I'm trying to figure out why that didn't look right. And that's because it ends up looking like another eye socket almost. It sweeps up, and it simply doesn't sweep up like that. So, and granted, he's got the skull placed as a somewhat awkward thing, but that arch that you see here, right? This is just straight down like that. It sweeps a little bit up, but not anything like that. Right? And I wonder if it's squeezing it out because it's at the end of the canvas, right? We've all been there, where you alter something. Some of the leaves on your plant in the student show, right? One of yours, wasn't it? The plant picture? Who did it? Isn't that yours? No? Of a plant, wasn't it? Oh, right. Okay, what is this figure? Good. Well, I can make more fun of it. One of the words in the student show is this plant, this part where the leaf kind of bends over just so obviously it's not going to sit on the page, and I think that's kind of what's there. So I'm not making fun of it, because working like Veronese, what good place that is, right? Similar to what Veronese said.
What is that not?
Sorry? Oh, it is a human skull. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. It's a human skull. Get up there and look. Right? That's a human skull. Here's the nose. Right? So there's the eye socket.
Right.
There's the nose.
Like our nose,
there's the
one part of the nose is not as protruded outward.
what would it is not a human?
I don't know, some kind of primate.
Yes, but that would be crazy. Because everything's wrong with the human skull. Why would Veronese throw a primate skull? It's not. There's the question to ask if you were Dan Brown. Right, looking for. Well, that probably wasn't that hard to do. It wasn't, the idea that it was hard to do anatomy studies in the Renaissance is a bit of a myth, right? It really wasn't that difficult to get your hands on actual things to do. Yeah, hard parts would be like fetuses and whatnot. So, for example, Leonardo's famous drawing of a fetus in the womb was based on a cow's womb. Right? And then he just made up the idea of the fetus inside of it and stuck that in. It wasn't based on real study, but it looks like and that would be difficult. There are certain things where the propriety, but there is this myth out there that, artists had to steal around to get their hands. No, it was pretty easy. Relatively, it was not as difficult as it is. But, Jan, I'm sorry, there would be no, you would have to have Veronese trying to actively be a heretic in order to have it be anything but a human skull. And at that point, the painting would be rejected by the people who were paying it anyway. Right? Now, also by this point in Veronese's career, the other reason I say that this is kind of important, and we'll get to it before class is over, Veronese in the 1570s had been hauled before the Inquisition for another picture. And by the 1580s, he was being incredibly careful. Right? So we'll talk about that because that comes up. And it had nothing to do with sort of anything weird that might be sort of occulty. Right? Occult occult.
I just thought of that because he's in the wilderness,
Yeah. No, but it's because, again, remember the paintings draw as much from tradition as they do from innovation. Right? There's a balance between the two. And that from tradition, and you know this from your studies in St. there's certain things that you just don't expect, right? So you wouldn't expect them to replace the lion with a leopard, or right, or the water flowing with something else. You wouldn't expect them to throw in a raven from an Elijah picture or something like that, right? It just doesn't happen. Because there are traditions, and the traditions are fairly sound. And this goes back to what we were talking about with the Council of Trent. What is the job, what is the role that's played by pictures? And that's to teach. Yeah. So in many ways, paintings are kind of like Scripture. And in the same way that it would be a sin to change the words of the Bible, it would also be a sin to radically change the syntax of a picture. Right? And so we have to think of the different things within the pictures as being the words of the picture, the syntax. Right? And you can't just willy-nilly decide to change things because the tradition is important. They need to be understood. So, if, however, there had been a tradition in St. Jerome pictures, we're going to be looking at St. Lucy. There are traditions where there are different legends about St. Lucy. One of them is that she has her eyes gouged out. Right? That doesn't mean we always do with eyes gouged out because there's an alternative version that sometimes they would turn to. Right? So sometimes we get variations within this, but that's got to be used. If nothing else could be. Okay. This Annunciation, was this out when we were downtown? We did, but we kind of ignored it. We didn't, well, we thought we didn't pay attention to it. It was in the same room as the big Doge picture by Tintoretto. I love his Annunciation pictures. If we had, this was earlier in the semester, I would talk about them more. So the angel coming in from the west, which is normal. Again, what's Veronese about Veronese? This is something to write on the exam. What's Veronese about? What's Veronese about this? Right? Free life. This is even more added, isn't it, with that battle frame behind it, right? So, not only are our main figures on the exact same tiles on the floor, right? They're not even inclined to forward this way from it at all. They're on the same set of tiles. And those tiles, plus the tiles on the balcony, plus the railing and the columns and the arcade up above, all of this serves to reassert the picture frame. Very horizontal, exactly. It parallels the picture frame, everything is, right? Other things that are Veronese, fabric, colors. Look at the things you don't normally see with the angel. Okay, not only do we have the robe, but we also have that piece of sort of exotic striped fabric, right, that binds at the chest of the angel, right? Virgin Mary on the right, I think I have a detail coming up. It's her bedtime. So there's nothing in her bedroom. This beautiful Italian over here bedroom, right? 7 summers of Lawrence. Was that the other little kid? Napping outside, and so there's the pillows of her bed. She's up in the middle of the night reading. She pulls the curtain back, and she's in the moment of her prayers. It's almost as if her prayers are answered in the moment of her prayers. And in this case, in this picture, the angel is standing. But I found another one where the angel is flying in, and they're really spectacular. Like they're just over the top, right? Because again, something we talked about with Tintoretto, that once they get these artists to render the human form so well, to get it up there floating, it just looks strange. Anyway, this one he's running it, as if we're almost charging it from the left to get the news to Mary. Other details in here, and I've got close-ups to show you, that are common, right? The lily that the angel is holding as a symbol of the Virgin Mary, for numerous reasons, and rather common in the Annunciation, going all the way back to the 14th century. The white of the lily was a symbol from the purity of the Virgin, right? The length of its stem, which was quite long, a parallel to the greatness, right? The greatest among women, going along with the tallest of all flowers. There's our close-up of our angel with the robe. And I'll come to the cat. Yeah. Right, it's great. I was just looking this up and I'm trying to find out more. I have some ideas, but I don't really know. There's her book in her bed, and she looks over her phone. Again, I think, there are some things that are similar to Tintoretto in a way, right? Look at the way the simplicity of the strokes that render the highlights and shadows of the robe is not dissimilar from Tintoretto, right? But what is the way in which he's distilled the image to be as simple as possible. Right. Down below, there's a vase, a crystal vase, at the base of her little lectern there. And certainly a crystal vase is also another virgin symbol, because what it shows is light passing through glass. Glass that is so clean that light can pass through it. A vessel that is so pure that light passes easily through it. And that is, in fact, a direct metaphor that was used going back to like the 13th century, that the Virgin Mary is the vessel most pure. And that if God is light, then God and light can pass through glass without breaking it. Then light can pass into the Virgin because she is just as pure as glass. Right? So we have a glass vase. And we see this often in the Annunciation scenes. Growing out of that glass vase is this flower. I can't really tell which one it is. That's where I got stuck looking for information on it. But I did notice 3 buds in the flower, which is obviously a reference to the Trinity, right? And the fact that they seem to be at different openings as well, right? As a reference to the Trinity. I love the cat. It's so cute. I think it's got a little bowl of milk or something, right? But it's all coming down. Now, cats are tough symbolically speaking. And this is where I wanted to do some more work as well, find out what was going on. Because they are often seen as symbols of anger, symbols of sin. And I wonder, right, here is a sin that has been contained. The fact that it's, or is it back there waiting as a reminder that there is sin out there? I don't know exactly what to do with it, right? Because it could be read in a number of different ways this way. I don't think he means that the Virgin is sinning. If any way there's that, but it has to relate to sort of the purity of the Virgin that we see in the foreground. It can either be the antithesis to that, or it could be a way of accentuating her control, right, her self-control. Up above, we have God the Father with angels, and you'll notice 3 of these little disembodied cherub heads around the dove of the Holy Spirit that is now descending toward the Virgin Mary as God the Father. Anatomy is a bit off, but right, the arms seem a little kind of close to the sides, but nonetheless is, I didn't exactly describe. In fact, I think it's meat kind of funky, don't they? But yeah, they're back like this. Right, a puppet. But again, I think this is a Titian reference. Right, I think this is going back to the Assumption of the Virgin. Is that God the Father coming? And again, so many times we've seen when artists make referential insertions in their pictures, but they do so because they do so not directly, not a mirror, so to speak, but rather in a way that is still inventive, right? And so it's homage to Titian, right? And especially to Titian's most famous work, surviving in Venice. Okay, we also looked at this downtown, Rebecca at the well, but I wanted to give it some context as well. The story of Rebecca at the well comes from Genesis 24. Abraham had been traveling great distances. He sent off his servant Eliezer. That's who the man in red is Eliezer. They were looking for a son for a wife for Abraham's son Isaac, right? And it had been prophesied that they would find her, right, in a different land, in a far-off land. So they've gone off looking for her, and Eliezer stops, and a woman immediately offers him water, and at this moment he remembers that the prophecy about who the wife for Isaac would be was that Isaac's wife would be the woman that offers you water, that offers you solace when there was none, right? For his son Isaac. So this is the moment when Rebecca, her actions, her care for Eliezer reveals her to be the prophesied wife, fiancé, of Isaac. So they will now convince her to come back with them to wed Isaac, right? So that's our storyline, and that's what he gives us. And again, frieze-like composition, focusing on these large dramatic figures arranged across the face of the picture plane. Again, very interest in colors and textures, fabrics, narrative accoutrements added into it. Animals, loves his animals. I love the camels, even though they're easy to miss because they're almost the same shade as the background. And what I love about them most is that you don't see them at first, and then they sort of start to creep in to your visual field, right? So there is some of his, again, luxurious fabrics and colors. And then his interest in narrative details, the adding of the servants and their actions as a major part of the composition. Even the servant in the back that almost gets lost, wearing the same color as the servant in the foreground, but trying to hold those two camels. Those are pretty good camels too. They're not bad for camels. We were talking about his troubles with lions. I wonder where he got his hands on camels. The faces aren't quite right, but they're still pretty good, as camels. Better than I can imagine a camel. Let's just put it this way. I didn't have one in front of me. Right?
Maybe that's why he made them so, discerning, because he didn't know.
I think that maybe, but I think also he doesn't want them to detract from the central theme, right? He really wants you to read the picture clearly. Because remember what the Canon of Reformation says, it's got to be legible. So if you put too much spotlighting, and you can see it's almost, again, this is very Baroque, right? Proto-Caravaggio spotlighting. That even hits the hind of the camel directly behind Eliezer, right? But if you made the background any brighter, right, that the trees and the bushes and the camels, then you wouldn't be able to read the figures as clearly, right? So I think it's part of a compositional choice contract. And you notice that further back it's lit again, right? The house on the back right is relit. So he's chosen to make almost like a curtain of darkness behind them, that the camels are an important part of. They block out the light of the sky even, to focus us on this group of figures that is arrayed across the picture plane in the immediate foreground. I think there's some humor in this too, the way they just peeks out from the side, right? Who's this looking at? And reaching around, right? And that's something, I think when we talked about what becomes Baroque art, this is a trick Rubens does all the time, and I wonder, he went to Italy, and if he'd seen some Veronese pictures doing this exact same thing. And again, these narrative details just have life to it. There's another camel drinking from a copper pot, right, in the lower right corner. Very beautifully drawn copper pot, and the second one on the left. They look more like copper pots here in my reproductions than they did when we were down there. I kind of read them when we were down there as being, porcelain or something, or earthenware, but no, it's quite obvious these are hammered copper pots, right? What we didn't know when we were down there is that this came from a series of 10 pictures, right? And this suite of 10 pictures, there were 5 Old Testament scenes and 5 New Testament scenes, right? So all are basically the same proportions of hours, which is to say wide, right? All of them have typical Veronese figures arranged in a frieze, right? These could very easily become tapestries if you wanted them to. Not that he did, but they would work out well because the background is really just a curtain behind these figures, right? But the fact that there are 10 of them, they're very, very big, they're very, very wide, suggests that they probably were intended to be hung, as a group, but more likely on opposite walls, like 5 down one wall and 5 down the other wall. And that's because that's a common decorative scheme, going back to a good example would be Sixtus IV, the Sistine Chapel. Underneath Michelangelo's ceilings in the 15th century, there were paintings on each of the walls. Boom, 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 down the walls. And what Sixtus had done was to get a bunch of artists to give him scenes from the life of Moses and scenes from the life of Christ. Because for Christians, Moses' life and Christ's life had significant parallels. Both led their people out of bondage into the promised land. Although Moses never saw that, Christ died as well before the people reached the promised land. You see, there's parallels here, right? Both of them are born at a time when a despot decides to kill all the male children, right? Herod for Christ, Pharaoh for Moses. Right? The parallels go on and on, right? Not that every aspect does, but Moses was seen as a prototype for Christ. And usually when we have 2 suites of pictures that go together, one of them is Old Testament and one of them is New Testament, what you'll find is that the artist working with an advisor will come up with a program where the scenes will pair up. One of the Old Testaments will pair up with one of the New Testaments. And I think these make a really nice pair, right? The one on the right, which is not in your text, is from the series, Christ Goes to Another Region, by Eliezer. Meets a woman at a well, asks her for water. She says, I didn't think your people liked my people. I didn't think you would ask me for water because our tribes don't get along. And this launches Christ in the whole thing about I am the water that makes you not thirst anymore, blah, 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 blah. Right? This is all John chapter 4. So the thematic pairing, and then notice the copper pot, right, suggests that you're meant to see these as pairs. So I would love to look at the series more to see if you can figure it out. The Old Testament scenes, all 5 are women. Scenes of Old Testament women. They're not all heroines. One of them is Lot's wife. Not a good example, right? Negative. Only 2 of the New Testament scenes have anything to do with women. So that's not the theme. And I haven't really worked it out yet, but, right, this one I'm sure is a parallel, right? Just there's too much going on to suggest anything else. Okay, here's Veronese's problem, is this picture. Like I said, we would get here, and here we are, and we've got time for it, which is good. He gets a commission from the Church of St. John and Paul, San Giovanni e Paolo, in 1571. They had a refectory. That's where the monks from that abbey would eat together. And the refectory had burned down. So they just rebuilt it, They needed a new picture in it. In the burnt down refectory, there was a painting by Titian, and it was a Last Supper. And this is common in monasteries, to have a Last Supper in the room where the monks would eat. It's normal. Leonardo's Last Supper was in a refectory in Milan. Right? This was the norm. You would break bread along with Christ. Right? So, who better than Veronese to replace Titian's work? Titian by this time is at the end of his rope, end of his career, right? Who better to do it? Over and above that, Veronese had started in the 1560s to paint a whole slug of images of festive meals. Biblical meals rendered really festively. So here's where Christ changes the water into wine. And that's a great picture. It's in the Louvre, right? Christ is in the center in blue and red. And you'll notice that he elaborates on it in this total Veronese fashion. With, again, everything parallel with picture plane. And all of these narrative accoutrements now just exploding, right, everywhere on it. To where it's like, wow, wine, right? Pouring wine over here, the musician. All of it, fabrics, you know. And with the image on the right, we'll talk about the title in a second, right? Christ is again in the center, but it's almost as if he's more interested, or every bit as interested, in all of the stuff he can pack in with the composition, right? In addition to the central scene itself. So he starts off, we know this for a fact, that he started off the composition intending it to be a Last Supper. Right? It's replacing a Last Supper. It's in a refectory. He's going to make a Last Supper, but he's going to make a Last Supper in a Veronese fashion, which is a big festive meal. Right? He chooses for the centerpiece of the Last Supper the moment when Christ announces that one of the disciples will betray him. Right? And so there he is making the proclamation. He's looking over at St. John in red and green. Right? St. John always has fair complexion. There's Peter on your left, a servant behind with the wine glass. Again, unnecessary narrative details, right? And I love St. Peter's yanking at the shank of some mutton to eat, right? And, this is where John is, well, who's it going to be? And Christ is going to, this is where he says, he who sups with me, right? Who sops their bread and the wine with me. So the bowl is right there waiting for it. And that's Judas on the right, facing shadow, looking out toward it. And you can see Christ has just said, one of you will be turned away, right? Typical, right? Don't look at me. No, even though he knows he's already done it, right? It's already in his heart. And his face is cast in shadow. He's right. Great dogs. That cat playing with the ball down below. Really wonderful details. So there's Judas. And you can see, as opposed to Christ and John, he's kind of ugly, he was kind of mean. They're trying to make his outward appearance reflect his inward character. So, there is Judas. So this is the moment, right? That's definitely a Last Supper. And what Veronese does with the composition, because that's just the center part of what appears to be almost like a triptych, right? You got three arches all painted. Is that as we move away from Christ making this proclamation, even Peter didn't seem quite to get it, right? Yes. And the further we get away from Christ on either side, right, the less they've heard the message. And that's kind of what Veronese is getting at with this, is that there's a message and it's going to spread, right? And so he uses the picture to show the spread of that message. And the fact that as we move past the columns on either side, it simply hasn't spread that far yet, right? But again, this is the sort of thing that has brought him some repute. Other side as well. And again, just chock full of these incredible narrative details, right? They love, again, with these sort of noble postures and gestures. And as much as figures like this fellow here might lean in and out, the overall effect is one of this frieze of figures across the... What we can't explain based on the idea of it being the Last Supper, is this guy. Who the heck is this man in red, expensive ermine-lined coat, dog behind his chair, looking in from the left? Who is this guy? And as it turns out, he wasn't part of the original composition. He was painted over a servant boy who was bringing food, which would make sense. So Veronese decided to change his mind with this red figure. And this is where it gets interesting. As he was working on the picture, he was called before a Counter-Reformation Inquisition for improprieties. They had heard about his picture. They had seen his picture, still incomplete. And they hauled him in front to explain himself. What the heck are you doing? Right? For this particular picture. He wasn't there yet, we don't think. You got this Last Supper. What's with all these other people? Right? They said that we don't like, and this is a quote, direct quote from the Inquisition. The buffoons, the drunkards, the Germans, the dwarves, and other vulgarities that you've included here. So if art is supposed to be accurate, proprietous, inspire piety, clear, right? What are these other figures doing there? By the way, there's the dwarf, right? Exactly, right? He's confusing the scene. And what we think is that he got wind of this coming. That, hey, it's not like they all of a sudden guess what? Paolo, we've got a problem with you. This is coming with years, I'm sure, leading up to him being called before, there were lots of things that happened. And then basically, Veronese says, they come to Veronese and they say, we want you, but you must have known that was coming. When you're in trouble with the authorities, you usually know it before they bust your door down. Right? Rarely does that happen. In cop movies, yeah, but, the norm, you get a sense. If it's within your own group, you know when there's trouble brewing. So what we think is that he started to try to make changes to the painting so he could say it wasn't the Last Supper. So he takes over the servant boy, puts this guy there, right? And adds him, there, put it back, adds him so that he can say it's not a Last Supper, it's Christ in the house of Levi. Now, Levi is Matthew before his conversion. Levi is Matthew during his life as a wealthy tax collector and banker. So the man in red is meant to be the pre-conversion Matthew. And that would then account for who all these other crazy people are, because this is Christ now going to the house of Matthew. Right? To convert the people who need conversion. And the reason he has dwarves and Germans and drunkards and buffoons is because those are exactly the people that Christ should be reaching out to. Crafty, right? They said, make some changes. They tell him, you've got to make some changes. So he comes back in, and this is all he does, and it works. He adds an inscription. That is it. Right? Made in the house of Levi. Dates it down below. And on the other side, right? From Luke chapter 5, just so you know, it's not the Last Supper. Right? And that's the only change he really makes in addition to this guy. And maybe he added the guy later to make it to Matthew. But the bottom line is that he's kind of become a crafty solution. What happened? It scared the living daylight, as you might imagine. Right? This is his stock in trade. If he's going to get persecuted by the Inquisition for paintings, he can't paint anymore. Right? This is huge. This is absolutely... It's not like he can just go somewhere else and paint. Right? He's done for. So it scares the living daylights out of him. He never did another festive meal picture. Even though through the 60s it's become his bread and butter. This is his last one ever, and I ain't going back there. Right? When he finally does do a Last Supper, he kind of does a more normal version of it. Right? Where it focuses on the family, right? And there aren't any buffoons and dwarfs around, drunkards added to it. He adds propriety, right? He really focuses on it. So if we go back to your Saints Row picture, right? In the 1580s, there is no way that he's going to be doing something that's not extraordinarily normal, right, in his works. And that's what, so that brings us to our last picture, which is this St. Lucy picture, where he's added things that aren't part of the normal legend, but he's done so to enhance the propriety of the image. So, St. Lucy was a very, very wealthy daughter of the daughter of a wealthy family, and she had numerous suitors as young. She's around the 3rd century, late 3rd century, around 300 AD, 300 AD. And the only daughter of a very wealthy family, which means she had numerous suitors who were lined up to marry her, to get that dowry. But from a very early age, she pledges herself to Christ, right, and will not marry a pagan. And she tries to have her convert her mom, and she finally is able to convert her mother. We think of the shadowy figure on the left. It's almost easy to ignore. It's probably her mother, right, that she converted. And when she converts her mother, she convinces her mother to give away her dowry, like to give all the money to the poor, because that's what Jesus would do. Right? Give money to the poor. And you might imagine this group of suitors who are lined up to marry this wealth want to stop this. Did you ever see Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, a Frank Capra movie from the 30s? Well, Mr. Deeds wins $1 gazillion. He inherits from some guy who's nice to us, inherits all of his wealth. And he goes off to New York, and he decides he's just going to give it all away. Because he doesn't want the money. He's from some small town. He doesn't want the mansion. He's just going to give it to people who need it. It's the height of discretion. And, of course, the lawyers try to stop him, right? Because that's the way these movies always work. St. Lucy's suitors try to stop her. One of them goes to the local prefect and then says, hey, she's giving away the money. Let's try and stop her. So they force her to worship a pagan idol, which she refuses to do, which is exactly what they want, because now they can kill her. They can condemn her to death because she hasn't done what she was told to do. Sounds like a Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, exactly that. So they force her to break the law. Right? And they try numerous ways of killing her until eventually she's stabbed, which is what we're seeing here. What's not part of the legend is her receiving her last communion at the moment that she's stabbed. That's something that Veronese is stuck in here. Now, it's weird, but it's nothing that detracts from the propriety of the image. Right? In fact, it adds to it. That it adds to the idea that her martyrdom leads to her glory in heaven. Right? And it happens at exactly the moment that she bears her breath to be stabbed. So those are nicely covered up. But still there's this idea of, why are you showing us this? And then you all very sacrosanct, right? So our priest with his servant over here on the right are adding to the propriety of the scene, right? And that, again, I think in many ways can be seen as a sort of logical outcome of his trials before the persecution. It's her receiving this at the moment that she bears her breath to be stabbed. Now, I didn't know what was going on in the background when we were downtown. I figured this out from her legend. One of the first things that they did to her on trying to, when they figured out she didn't know anybody was going to stop her, the first thing they did was they're going to drag her to a whorehouse and have her filed so that she give herself to Christ, pledged her virginity. Let's get that out first, right? So they get a team of officers that are going to drag her to the city square,
that didn't work. So those are the options, right? And this figure, this statue here, could either be the idol that's in the worship, or it could be a symbol of the whorehouse that she's been brought down to. Right? Either of these symbols, perfectly fine. So there we see the people who have the same stat. I think there are more of them up here, but my detail wasn't very clear. So, okay, that didn't work. Step 2, right? They try to burn her at the stake. And God won't let the wood burn properly. Right? It keeps snuffing out. So where people say, he sees a funeral fire that was supposed to consume her. All of these things then led to, okay, fine, stack. Right? But sometimes that doesn't work, but this one, right? And, the normal account, it's not biblical outside of that, says by sword, but knife works. Okay?
What did you say that is?
Those are the stakes that she was going to burn at. But the flames won't keep, but they can burn the stakes. Right? The thing that we don't see, I'm sorry, we're in this later. It's our last picture, right? So the thing that we don't see in this picture is the part of St. Lucy's legend that is the most famous part, which is that she had her eyes gouged. Now, this was not part of the original legend. It didn't come up until the 15th century. Okay, that Lucy had her eyes gouged out. But that's part of the tortures that we see referred to here. Is that she had her eyes gouged out. And then, at the moment that she was going to be buried, they looked down at the body, preparing the body for burial, and the eyes were out. Her face is been restored. And that's probably made up later, because Lucy's name means life. Lucia is the word for life, right? So why isn't, you can imagine some theologian saying around the 50th century saying, why is it lesbian? I mean, you die. Why is it life? And so they added it. And it exists in terms of 2 different ones. One is that it was part of her torture, which you alluded to here. The other is that she gouged out her own eyes because they were attracting all these students, and she didn't want to be attracted to these students. Right? And that either way, there were efforts to reform. What we don't see is any allusion to that whatsoever, because, again, the question is whether that's fully part of the legend. Right? Look back to the original legend. And there is no reference whatsoever to her missing eyes, which we can look at this point. Nor anything anywhere of her holding them on a plate, which you often see. Right? It's just as if you didn't know the legend of English otherwise, you wouldn't know. Okay, so listen, for Friday, I haven't got anything to present. Right? For Friday, I would like to do a review to talk about where we are, sort of go back over some major themes and whatnot. But there'll be no new material on Friday. But you've got everything you need now to start studying with these exams next week. Right? What we'll do is we'll go back and look at some of the themes we talked about, maybe pull up a couple possible comparisons, contrast, things to choose from. Right? So definitely don't think that it's a good day not to come to class. But realize that you don't need to be taking notes in the same way, because I won't have new material to do. But what we'll do is things that will help you succeed on the exam. Okay? If you know people who are here, know that Mark knows they're not here too. Right? And that they should. I know that one of them emailed me and said that they were sent. So I got that. But the other stuff. Okay? So I'll see you guys on Friday. I'm sorry that we're 5 minutes late. Oh, there's a talk at 5 o'clock. The Humanities Grad Program sponsors an annual talk. This one you've seen posted around on careers in the humanities, I think, or something along those lines. I'm going over there. It's over in the branch library at 5 o'clock. So, in the auditorium, yeah.